evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demon Lab podcast. My name is Andy, and the Demons have claimed another piece of silverware in the form of the 2023 Preseason Cup, going undefeated and on top of the ladder on percentage after the two matches. There is only 12 days to go until our 2023 Premiership campaign begins, and I can't wait to get back to the G to cheer on the Ds. Joining me tonight to discuss our final practice match against the Tigers is our resident tactician, Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Demon Ladders. I'm feeling it. It's a couple of weeks away, getting super excited now. I'm really, really excited about this season. After, as I said last week, after sort of having a bit of a break from footy over the summer. So one of the bonuses about the way that they've organised this practice season is with the gather round is that footy starts a week early.
Yeah, it does. I didn't realise that. Big Man, your connection, you're going in a little bit in and out then. Let's hope it can stabilise. If not, we'll get you to reconnect shortly. I can see your pictures moving again, so that's a good sign. George is still away, but we'll be back next week to join us for our season preview show, where we'll give our thoughts about the Ds and analyse our biggest contenders and give our predictions for the coming season. We'll also take your questions, so jump on demonland.com and look for the season preview podcast thread. If you want to leave us a voicemail question or comment about the season preview, please give us a call on 0390163666, 0390163666. And don't worry, during the week, nobody answers, so you don't have to speak to anyone. You can also call that number tonight if you actually do want to speak with a person. That's Bin Man and myself. And you can make a comment, ask a question, 0390163666. Or you can join us in our chat room at demonland.com/podcast. And a little bit of promotion for the podcast. On Thursday morning, I'll be interviewing one of Demonland's sponsored players, Brodie Grundy, and I'm really looking forward to having a one-on-one chat with him. There's a lot to talk to him about on the eve of the new season. If you have a question for Brodie, please post it in the podcast thread that we've got on demonland.com that's promoting the interview. I'm interviewing him on the Thursday, and I haven't decided whether I'll broadcast that live on the website on the Thursday night or just release it into the wild sometime on Thursday, and you can find that where all good podcasts are sold. So stay tuned for that interview with Brodie a bit later in the week. But let's get into the wrap-up of this match. When you play a couple of practice matches, you want to see a few things, and you want to see some improvement or changes from the previous season. You want to see some good form. You want to see us unearth a couple of players, and most importantly, you want to get through the games unscathed. And I think we seem to have ticked off all of those things in these two practice matches. The Viney injury at training notwithstanding, the Ds, they stamped their authority on this contest very early with the Twin Towers, Max Gawn and Brodie Grundy. If there was any doubt as to whether this scintillating combination can work, then you need only look no further than the two games, albeit pre-season matches, that these two have already been paired in. Last week it was 35 hitouts and 3 goals. This week, whilst having less hitouts than their opponents, they've combined for 6 goals between them, 3 apiece, a combined 27 disposals and 11 marks. And even if you were to get a fraction of that combination each week, particularly in front of the goals, you'd be pretty wrapped. And the Ds have been threatening in the midfield throughout this shortened pre-season, and even with the absence of the injured Jack Viney, there were plenty of helping hands assisting in the dominance of Clayton Oliver and Christian Petrarca. Harms, Cozzy Sparrow and Nibbler all spent time rotating through the guts. Add to that the total domination on the wings by our other dynamic duo in Ed Langdon and Lockie Hunter, with their crisp, clean ball movement and lots of gut running in that Casey heat. All of this gave our forwards and whoever the resting ruck was some very good supply. The rejuvenated Tom McDonald was also able to chip in with 3 goals of his own, whilst our small forwards took their opportunities and hit the scoreboard too. Our rock-solid defence were unstoppable, holding another team to just 70 points. The Talls in May, Lever and Petty were marking and intercepting up a storm. And the standout defender for me this week was Jake Bowey with 19 disposals at 100% disposal efficiency by hand and foot. And that's just elite numbers. The Demons were far too strong for a near full-strength Tigers list, coming away victors by 50 points. So another pre-season comes to an end and we set our sights for round one and the Bulldogs on the MCG. But before we get into that, we have a number of questions from our fans who have left questions on our podcast thread on demonland.com. And we also have a question that a caller has left on our voicemail. Before we get into that, B-Man, do you have any quick takeaways you want to mention about our match?
Just that a couple of things. Is one, I was a bit surprised how strong that side was. I was saying last week that I thought they would rest some of the senior players. Wasn't the strongest side that they could have put on the field because we had Hibbo and JJ running around in the and JVR in the warm-up game, the Casey game. But it wasn't really a simulation. It was a full match, practice match, wasn't it? Proper rules. I think the bench was, the rule was in place, and they had the full Fox crew down there. And just the other takeaway, really briefly, did I see on Dreamland that you went?
Yeah, I did. It was a last-minute decision. I think I said to you after last week's show that I wasn't going, and I made sort of a decision at about 1:30, 2 o'clock to get down there. And I was actually hoping to get there for the twos, and I got there like an hour early, but the game had already finished.
Right. The reason I was asked, I was wondering about the atmosphere because on the television it looked fantastic. Same as Moorabbin last week. I mean, it's how keen are people for footy? They looked like there was 5,000 to 10,000, maybe not 10,000. It looked like there was 5,000 people.
Yeah, I'm not a good judge with crowds, but it was if you've ever been to Casey, it was chock-a-block. There was barely room to move.
It looked like that on the television. It looked like a real footy atmosphere too. So. Suburban footy is alive and well, at least in the simulation/practice match pre-season season.
Yeah, it was good. It would have been nice, if the club could have benefited in a way. It was free, and obviously that's nice, and people got their kids along and families. So obviously it's a nice thing to not charge people. But it would have been nice to make some money out of that. But there were a lot of Tigers there. I thought they outnumbered us in terms of fans. So I'm not sure what our demographics out that way are, but there seem to be more Tigers there.
Well, we'll get into this as we talk, but they might have outnumbered us crowd-wise, but they didn't outnumber us at the fall of the ball, and that was, for me, the takeaway of the match was our gut running was incredible, and as I talked about last week, it was, outnumbering them in defence, losing the ball, turning it over off the opposition, getting it back up to our offence, and being able to outnumber them up there as well. So, it was a terrific performance in terms of that running, and just the full team defense was spot on. They Tigers, who run much, a similar model that we've built ours on, looked all at sea in terms of their ability to transition. They didn't punish us on our turnovers when we did it, I didn't think, but so often they got a sort of messy kick inside 50 only for us to clean it up. So very, very impressive all round, really.
Yeah, I sort of wonder. I know we were pretty. We've gone in with our best available team.
Well, except for JJ and Hibber. I mean, Laurie probably in that team. Laurie's not going to be playing, and nor is Woden.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but it was pretty. We were obviously just giving those guys a go and seeing how they went, and we'll probably talk about that a bit later on because we've got some questions about how they performed in the match. But I don't know where Richmond are in their program. Whether obviously they went in with a pretty strong team, but whether they were taking it seriously, as serious as we seem to take it. That I don't know. I'm not suggesting that they didn't take it seriously, but I just don't know what they're...
Say that because I think they did, and I'm same with the Saints, and they lifted their pressure after half time again, same as the Saints. I just think they couldn't go with us, was my feeling. Like I would be a bit worried if I was a Tigers fan because they're not really in a position to ease into the season. I wouldn't have thought, and if it was a fitness test, we won that particular test, so. I would be, not thrilled if I was, how they're looking if I was a Tigers fan.
There were a few Tigers fans around me that didn't seem too pleased, and I reckon if they didn't have those 3 premierships to hang around their neck, that they would be burning memberships left, right, and centre. Well, let's get into the listener questions, and we'll start with our voicemail caller, Noah. So here we go.
Hey guys, this is just Noah here. Just a question around Melbourne this year in 2023. I just wanted for your opinion to rate on how you are going to view our forward line this year, and what are your feelings around the prospects around JVR and how well he'll go this year. Go D's.
And before you answer that, Bin Man, Demonland Lazy asks a similar question. Should we be blooding JVR early / getting Shacky in the mix, as it's probably more likely than unlikely that T-Mac and Benny Brown won't be able to play all games this season? So, B-Man, what are your thoughts on getting JVR games early and perhaps getting Shacky into the mix? Do we get these guys in early or wait until the wheels fall off with injury or something, if they even do?
Look, I don't think they'll be looking to get anyone in early. I mean, like I said at this same time last year, the first 6 weeks of the footy season are critical. You've got to bank those wins. We did last year. It sets you up for the full season in terms of finishing top 4. The first 6-7 rounds are critical. We've got a tough first 3-4 games. One of them, they won't be playing any games with selection. It will be best player available, and they'd certainly, be interesting as the season goes on in terms of that question that came up last year will come up again. Do you rest players like Maxi? They've sort of they've put on the agenda that that's something they might look to do. Probably Brown is the one of those two because he's got that chronic knee injury, but you wouldn't think that they would be even thinking about managing or resting anyone until closer to the mid-season bye. And even then, history would suggest that they're not, Goody's not keen on doing that anyway. But there's been, and we'll probably touch on them through the show tonight, but there's been a few sort of differences this year, hasn't there, that they've, maybe it's on the back of the review they did where, they're doing things slightly different, and that might be one of them. But I can't see there'd be any chance that they'd be looking to gift Shacky or JVR a game to give Brown and McDonald a chop out. It'll be best available is the Goody mantra, and why wouldn't it be? So, really critical. In terms of that mix, the question from the caller from Stu, I think that's Noah, I should say. I think it's a really good mix, and I'm really hoping that the indication from the way that game was umpired flows through to the season proper, because we were getting those arm chops and holds, except the one poor old Judd McVeigh didn't get. But up forward, we even got a couple of ones that I thought were a little bit ticky touchwood, where McDonald got one where he just kicked. That was such a beautiful kick. Brown got a couple. Those players, particularly late in quarters when teams tire, with the way that they've got the umpires, and I think the extra umpire on that 50-metre arc looking into the contest is going to be huge for us with our basically a 4-tool setup with, the two bigs, McDonald and Brown, and then you've got Maxi and Grundy rolling through there. They're going to be hard to not give away frees, and so that's going to be, a big boon for us. I think the other thing with Brown and the question about JVR is I can't really see JVR coming in for Brown as such. They'll play slightly different roles. Those 2 talls and the resting ruckman really stretches the opposition defence height-wise. You've got to put a tall player on them, otherwise they'll eat you up. But I can see JVR playing T-Mac's role, that high up and down the ground running. They rucked him a bit in Casey last year, so they'll get him around the ball. So if someone does need to come out for resting or whatever, I could see JVR coming in for McDonald, whether that be injury or. But at the moment, I reckon JVR is going to have to cool his jets, and Shacky's even behind JVR. So we've gone from not having any down there this year to last year to a surfeit of riches. So hopefully it translates to scoreboard.
Yeah, look, I was very bullish in the preseason on JVR. I really liked what I saw of him down at training, but I think we have to probably cool our jets on him, because even if he does come in, I think we all expect that he's going to, out of the blocks, be this amazing player. But, I think we need to temper our expectations. It'll take him a while to, as a lot of big men, takes a while for them to hit their strides. So, even though I wanted last year, but we had necessity at the end of the year because we didn't really have the players. But yeah, I think with T-Mac and Benny Brown, I think we've just got to temper the expectation.
And the other thing about JVR is playing good. He loves to play players to their strengths. And as I say, he's almost like a classic old school full forward, isn't he? The way he plays, and Brown isn't, in that sense. But they've got a really interesting sort of development question as the season goes on, because they want to get game time into him, don't they? So, there's the question of how we use the 23rd man. We haven't used the sub, we haven't used a big for that role, but he's relatively flexible. He rucked a bit at Casey. He can play high half forward. McDonald can go back. If a defender goes down, he can come on and McDonald can go back. So he can cover a few. He can cover the sort of half forward, a fritter position. So he can cover a few. But, if history's any guide, Goody prefers, a player like JJ who can play sort of on the half back and go into the midfield and a bit more flexibility.
Yeah, I agree. We'll talk about it next week in a previous show, but I think we're going to utilise that 23rd man with a player like JJ, or that type of player that has a bit more flexibility. I don't think we'll see a big man as that player, but perhaps maybe it could be him, but we'll see. All right, Noah also called in with another question regarding playing injured players, and I guess it relates to that article in The Age where Max admitted that he almost missed the do-or-die semi-final last year against the Lions with a painful hip injury, and then he won a reprieve. There's also a discussion in a thread on Demonland about this, but I think we'll hold that over until our season preview show, because it relates to something that probably cost us late in the season last year, and hopefully this season we better manage our players, particularly those that are injured, so that history doesn't repeat itself. So Noah, we'll get to that. I'll keep that. I've saved it, and we'll keep it for next week. RPFC says, general comment, but you can agree or disagree. The inclusion of Pickett, Rivers, Spargo, and to a lesser extent Sparrow into midfield rotations and stoppage structures indicates a natural maturation of those players and of the footy department to avoid the sins of last year, where we seemingly had depth but no adaptability or flexibility of the roles that those depth players could play. Now, before you answer that, big man, Lefty also says, there is certainly merit in spreading the midfield load around so as not to burn out our 3 stars, Track, Clary and Vines. But how confident are you in our second and third tier mids that it won't be costly against some of the contenders? Granted, we won't be going in with many no-name brand centre bounce attendances, but we don't want to be robbing Peter to pay Paul. And Roger Melly, he echoes this thought. Can you please discuss the midfield function generally, and more specifically how the non-regulars performed in the middle? Cozzy, Harms, Sparrow, A&B, Rivers, Spargo, Brayshaw, and whoever else was in there. I see a bit of a gulf between the regulars and the rest, although Cozzy could be anything. So, Bidman, what do you think about our second and third tier mids? Are you confident in their ability to hold their own against some of the competition's best? And I assume we won't be playing an entire second or third tier mid rotation together at one time, but individually, are you happy with what you've seen this pre-season from the second and third tiers?
Yeah, working back from, the original question from RPFC, I really like them rolling through there, and it's sort of an example of what I was saying before of the coaching staff and Goody, trying some different things. I think he's unfairly criticised over his journey at Melbourne for being stuck in it, and if you go back and think, he's actually really prepared to try different things, even back to his first year with that diamond off the half-back flank that was taken off the table when they went to 6-6-6. But That's certainly what Geelong did last year. So what I wouldn't necessarily agree with is the sort of notion that it was covering the sins as such. I mean, he had a sort of particular philosophy, but the sort of linking those questions together is that, it's the setup they're so critical, the clearances, and there's a lot of emphasis on the centre clearances, but really it's the stoppages. And I note that we actually lost clearances overall, but critically we won the around the ground stoppages, and they're really critical to the way we play footy. So that they're important in the mix too. But people, often focus on the centre bounce because everyone can see the setup really clearly. What I'd say with, all of those rotations, there's complexities with it. You've got a new ruckman in Grundy in the mix as well. It's sort of, I don't think it's Goody's style to implement something mid-season that they haven't had 6 or 7 weeks of pre-season to train it and drill it. Last year, for instance, Rivers wasn't in shape to be able to be a midfield player. I really love Cozzy going through there. Partly, as I said last week, it means he's going to move from averaging 8, 9, 10 possessions a game to up 15, 20. And you could sort of see some of his kicking. It was just sublime on the weekend. So you get him up around the ball and he's just so creative. A lot of work would have to go into those combinations because each combination would have to practice it at training and get the drills right, and probably actually away from prying eyes, probably inside, where they train setups and they've got, as I said, they've got Grundy in the mix. It is a big difference because, in terms of philosophically, because that, the triumvirate of Viney, Track and Oliver must have come to 80% of the bounces last year. So, just on those players, Rivers is the one that I don't think looks a natural sort of midfield. He didn't have as good a game this week.
He didn't play. He barely played in the midfield at all. He went to one centre bounce.
And his kicking's a bit sketchy too. And so, the midfielders, when you've got average kicking, they're around the ball, obviously. And so, they're in attacking parts where the ball is. So I'm not a huge fan on that. I thought Nibbler was brilliant all day. He had a fantastic day. And some of his kicking was just fantastic. It was interesting watching him in the midfield. He looked like he was playing a slightly defensive role. So I guess they'll all have their own specific roles within it. And I think it's as much as anything to, yes, they've talked about keeping the three guns fresh, but I wonder whether part of it too is to keep the opposition thinking a bit about how do you manage this, because they will have all had their plans, sort of written in stone from last year about how they manage Viney and Track and Oliver. Throw that mix and suddenly they've got to do some different thinking about it. And in particular, Cozzy, I think he's the real, to be honest, he's the real X factor in there, the opposition coaches really do have to think about, how they're going to manage his, the way he plays in the middle. The rest, not so much, but I wonder whether they're, it's really, like Nibbler playing a defensive role. Harms was playing a defensive role. The other thing that I'd love to get some insight in from, some of the posters who have got a footy background in terms of the setup is where they stand at the centre bounces. So, that actual setup is something that they must spend hours trying to work out, around the clock face, 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 and 9, that sort of thing. That's not something you can just go into the season and make up as you go. They will have had to spend a lot of time working through all of that. Some of those, I think that's a reasonable point about the maturation. Someone like, Rivers is now into his fourth season?
Yep.
Fourth season. So, they're starting to get experienced players. A player like Nibbler is so disciplined. He'll play the role that he's being asked to do. Sparrow, he had, after being quiet last week, he had a great game, and he's got a very Viney-like ability and Track-like ability to collect the ball standing still and hold off an opposition and still get the boot to ball, and he did that a couple of times. So I think he's really, he was in the midfield last year. I think he's an important player, particularly with Viney not in the team.
And he kicked a goal as well, which we love midfielders that kick goals. Whilst we're on the midfield, Viper Crunch asks, what did you think of Oliver swapping into a role across half-back to allow Gus midfield minutes? I think we all expected the midfield to forward rotation with Track and Cozzy, but the Gus/Clary one was a surprise, but it looked effective to me. Bin Man, what are your thoughts on Oliver as a defender? Are we likely to see him in defence, or was this just a typical preseason throw the magnets around the board type of move? I must say I didn't really notice him play in defence
I didn't either
until I saw that question. So
yeah, I saw that question and didn't. There'd be no reason why. He's a smart footballer, isn't he? He's an old school footballer in the sense he's got high footy IQ. There's no reason why Oliver couldn't, chop out someone on the halfback flank and do a reasonable job. But as a general thing, I'd rather Gus back there and Oliver in the centre, to be perfectly honest. And I thought we had, I forget the number, but it was maybe 20 or something intercept marks between between Gus, Petty, and Lever and May. Might have even been more, might have been 29 or something. But, and he's really important and was in 21 and in the first half of last year of marking down back and intercepting. So I actually really like Gus. I'm happy for him to stay on the halfback flank, to be perfectly honest.
D Old Fart says, as an interstater, I could only watch the game on TV. While there were some standout players, for me they were Track, Max, Maisie, Nibbler, Hunter and Bowser. The aspects that impressed me most were how well our boys seemed to be on the same page and how even we appeared across the field and how fit we seemed to be compared to the Tigers. Are these reasonable observations? And if so, how well does it place us for what is a very tough draw in the early part of the season? In my opinion, with the draw we have, it would be a great indicator of how far we can go in 2023, barring significant injuries, if we are 3-0 after 3 games.
I think they're great observations. I absolutely 100% agree. First of all, I keep saying it, we look incredibly fit. And we were fitter than the Tigers, who, in the context where both clubs have just done their preseason, block. And so, the Tigers are a team that, like us, depend on the fitness of their players to be able to outnumber at the ball, the drop of the ball. And they just look like they couldn't go with us. But I think that point about the synergy and the energy, I think that's really true. Is they do look on the same page. There were quite a few examples of some pretty neat handballs, not quite look away handballs, but handballs to space basically, which is something that's interesting because they're not doing those long handballs that I talked about last season nearly as much, and they seem to try and avoid, if they can, the short, sharp handballs. But there were a number of chains where we linked up, and that's been really evident. And also, so's the kicking. So there's been a number of times, both kicking to leading spots that are obviously well drilled. You've been to training, I haven't been to training, but all the reports from the track watchers and yourself are that it's really, really energized team. There's lots of laughter. There's lots of good vibes. There's real positive attitude, it seems to me. So I think that point about them being on the same page is fantastic. It's a really good point. And the final comment I'd make about that question or comment is that I really like the fact that we've got a tough beginning to the season, because it means that, and there's a question about this later, and we'll talk about it then a little bit more. But I think it sets us up well for the season to get these games out. And even if we happen to lose one, who knows, that may not be such a negative, but again, those first 5-6 games are so critical for all clubs. You're not going to make top 4 if you don't go, something like 4-2 in those weeks, or it's going to be difficult. Maybe not is too extreme, but it's going to be very difficult.
Oh, you've just made my MFCSS flare up a little bit with talk about us having to be 4-2. Now you got me.
Well, 4-2.
My anxieties.
It's just the way it is, isn't it? You've got to. It's every year, basically. The top 8 is pretty much set by the mid. By round 10. And it's important but I think it's good for us because it gives us the opportunity straight away to test ourselves, and they seem to be, which is sort of the energy they were talking. They seem to be looking for that, and my sense was Dazzle Dave on Demonland noted that we appeared to be a couple of levels above the Tigers, and I thought exactly the same thing. In fact, I thought St Kilda were in some ways, better than the Tigers to some extent. The Tigers have a game plan. It's pretty similar to ours in philosophically, it's about territory, but we just didn't let them play their game. They looked like they were playing catch up the whole time, and the amount of times they kicked into us. I mean, they know the game we play. They know that we have a spare in defence. They know that they can't be kicking dump kicks into our forward line because we'll just intercept mark and bounce off the halfback flank, and yet they still were unable to stop doing it. And that's a big part of that is our ability at stoppages and clearances to put pressure on them, and that's what we weren't doing so well last year. But we seem to be really switched on and putting pressure on every single kick. And just while I think of it, there were a couple of examples of that. Nibbler, who's right near the end of the game, there were 3, 4, I think even like a fourth effort. It was incredible. The game's dead, was hot. He's still throwing himself in, tackling, smothering, getting the next ball, kicking out. And we finally scored on that play. And the other one similarly is Max, like at one point near the end of the game, diving across the mark to smother from, Nankervis, I think, was kicking, and he sort of dived across and touched it. The commentators noted it. I mean, that's just inspirational stuff from the skipper.
A 3183D says, the in-depth analysis of the podcast is so much appreciated. The pods are getting better and better. Thank you. It would be great if you could somehow get Goody on to have a chat with Bimman about the loading and tactics theory. I'm sure he wouldn't give away much anyway, but would be fascinating to hear how close you guys are in your observations. And yeah, I would love to interview Goody, MFC, if you're listening. Let's get Goody on. But I think Binman would probably prefer to interview Selwyn Griffiths to ask about the loading, because I think he's the man to ask in that sense.
He is, and what I will say though on that is that what I've heard is that Selwyn Griffith is flogged him, totally flogged him last year, and he's gone up a notch this year, and that it goes back to saying we look incredibly fit. We look fitter than the two teams we've played. That's there's a question about this later, isn't there? About how the intensity's been such a theme. The implication being for me that maybe it wasn't there at the beginning of last season, or not where it needed to be. But as the question we'll touch on later suggests, is that it's a long season, so it'll be interesting to see. But we 100% look fit and ready to go. That's for sure. And critically, as I said last week, we've hardly had any players. Maybe there's Smith and there's one or two others who haven't got their full training block in that January, February, and say, I think I remember a few years ago there's data around X percentage of sessions, basically, which is like 95% of every session completed at a minimum to get all of the sort of base down that you need to do to get prepared for the season. And even Viney, with his injury, that came right at the end of the big training block. So he should be, good to go. Same with Salem in terms of that's probably the other one, but, he would have got all his kilometres in his legs, hopefully. So we'll be fit come season.
3183D also says, I only saw a replay of the game, but it looked as if our kicking had improved greatly, but also the movement by hand. Do you think this is a continuation of the long handball theory from the back end of last year? But you've just mentioned you don't think we are handballing as much.
Well, I mean, one of the things that happened last year, I think, is that we were getting hurt on the outside now in terms of, they were picking off us, and I'm sure they were using the handballs those long handballs to clear the congestion, but they don't seem to be doing that this year, and they're using kicking, as I was saying last week, much more to move the ball forward. And as I said, kicking has the benefit of giving the receiver two options. They can hold up should they think there's nothing to go, or they can release. But the long handball, doesn't give any other option other than you got to keep the ball in motion. There were more sort of smaller chains of handballs, which was more like how we were playing in 21, is that wave running and you sort of spread it, out, than there was against St Kilda, and that then was the case last year. I think that's partly a response to how the opposition were looking to hurt us once we released the ball from a contested area last season. But the point about the kicking is just spot on. The kicking, it's probably we were 80%. I almost fell off my chair when I was watching the game. Where right near the end of the first quarter, we were 80% disposal efficiency. They weren't too shabby either. They were 72%. And I'm not sure what it ended up being. I doubt it finished at 80%. But some of the kicking was just sublime. Nibbler hit a couple of brilliant kicks. Hunter's goal from left foot into the pocket, he was doing nothing but going for goal. He wasn't being greedy because he looked in board. Was just a thing of beauty. Tom McDonald off 2 steps from the pocket when he got a sketchy free kick and just drilled that. That's a tight pocket down at Casey. The wind comes through that gap as well. It was a beauty. And I was super. So, there were Bowey didn't hit a target. I remember I was saying last week those critical 25, 40 metre kicks, particularly in the back half, because you turn them over and you're obviously giving the ball back in a dangerous spot, but you also lose control of the game and the momentum and the tempo. He didn't miss a thing. And I'm not sure about you, but you see him collect the ball. And I just have total confidence that he's going to hit a target. So, that role at Caleb Daniel, it's very similar. And it's super, super important. They don't look much, those 20-metre kicks, 25-metre kicks, but you hit 100% of them as opposed to 60 or 70% that Gus or Rivers would do. Then that's a huge difference in every time you don't turn it over is an opportunity to create a scoring chain for your team and an opportunity to deny the opposition the ball and a scoring chain for them. So super impressive. And the other thing I have to say with the kicking, 2 things, is that I was really impressed with Grundy's kicking for goal. Really simple action, 2 or 3 steps. Also, the second one the first one where he kicked around the corner, look, that was a beautiful kicking action. And Maxi's goal, he flushed that dead straight. Also similar, only 2 steps, sort of not too many moving parts. And the final thing about kicking that I thought was interesting is, I might be sort of imagining this, but they seem to have sort of been working on a kick that isn't quite a high kick to a pack and isn't quite a low drilled pass, sort of like a hybrid when they're kicking to the balls in particular. So there were a few to Maxi where it was sort of to a pack situation, but Nibbler did one, and I think Chandler or Hunter as well, but a bit lower and flatter, quicker, but out in front of Maxi. So there, obviously needing to kick over the top of over the top into holes. But I think that's one just to watch whether that's something we've been trying to do, kick to those tools advantage, but get it there quickly so that, makes sense, doesn't it? Because the quicker it gets there, the less opportunity there is for the opposition to zone off and get an extra to the contest and smash it away. So I couldn't be more impressed with the kicking. I just love, as I've talked about a million times, I love good kicking.
Yes, we've heard. Just in terms of Grundy and Grundy being a forward, there's a lot of talk of people saying, "Oh, he's not a forward. He can't play forward." Was he ever tried as a forward, as in not as a forward because he's obviously a ruckman, but as a resting forward? Was he tried of that at Collingwood, or they just rested him on the bench and never tried him in that position? Because I don't know where this comes from, that he's not a forward, because he's got a good kicking style for goal. He didn't look awkward, as Maxi can at times. I thought he's a good kick and a good mark. So I'm just wondering where he's not a forward comes from.
Well, they said on the call that in answer to that question, actually, they said that he basically didn't play as a forward. They 80% ruck time. That was what they said on the call. Collingwood, about 70 to 80% of his time in the ruck, and I guess the rest of the time on the bench. Or so. Short answer is he's not played as a forward. He was the recipient of a couple of those low flat kicks. One in particular, that goal that set up, the one where he turned around the corner, was into the pocket, but it got there quickly and meant that he was able to just one-on-one and muscle the player out. I think that's the thing that Grundy's going to give us Jackson doesn't is that, he's an elite ruckman. So he's going to win dangerous balls at stoppages around the ground, whereas Jackson isn't an elite ruckman. And the point of difference, that he gives, when Maxi a chop out is that he's got a great leap, and some ruckmen can struggle with that at the centre bounces. It's a different look to Maxi, and also, of course, he's good below his ground as like that extra mid, but he's not an elite ruckman. But when Maxi leaves the contest and Grundy comes in, you've got another elite ruckman, and that's important in a general sense, but it's even more important around the grounds, because the other problem for as a ruckman for Jackson is that he's not strong enough yet to wrestle. At stoppages are all about wrestling the ruckman, the throw in or a ball up around the ground. They wrestle. He can't do that, and he can't really use his leap in that scenario either. So we've got now a ruckman who's going to chop out Maxi, be good in the middle, but also be powerful around the ground. And he looks at this stage to be a more natural forward than Jackson. So I think that all things being equal, we've done really well out of that trade. And to me, it's a much more formidable duo than Jackson and Gawn.
It is. I mean, obviously, it's not as long term as say Jackson. So we've got to make hay while the sun shines, and while we're in this window, utilise it to the max. Part of the pun.
I mean, how old's Grundy now? 28, 29?
Yeah.
I mean, he's so fit. Yeah. And, he's had some injuries, but they're not chronic knee. Not like Benny Brown, for instance. They don't seem to be that sort. So he could still play for another 4 or 5 years at this level.
He's
Maxi
28. Well, he'll be 29 in April.
There you go. Like he could easily play for another 4 years, couldn't he?
Look, they're both the way we play them might extend both of their careers just a little bit, whether it's 1 or 2 years, hopefully. So until the cavalry arrives, when's Jeff White's son available to play?
Yeah. Well, and Varel looked,
to
my eye, Varel looked quite a prospect. So, I know it's a challenge getting those younger players, but it's good that we've slowly got rid of our, what are they, the Category B ex-basketballer / ruckman. So.
Singer says, clearly the Gawn-Grundy pairing is working so far, in particular with their forays up forward in both practice matches, 3 goals between them in the match sim and 6 goals between them in the pracky match. In addition, having the presence of one of them a kick behind the play whilst the other one is resting forward is a bonus, as it is a strong marking presence down the line if the opposition gets the ball out of the forward line. He's got something else to say, but in the between, I'll just jump in. Being at the game, it was really nice to see when they were both on the ground and one of them was forward, the other one was really a kick behind the play up, sort of a half forward wing, and they were just picking it off when the ball would just get quickly kicked, as he mentions, when the quick kick comes out of a hurried kick comes out. We just had one of our ruckmen, whether it was Max or Grundy, just standing there. Either by themselves or in a one-on-one contest. So, I love that being a kick behind the play when the other's forward.
The synergy, it'll take them time to develop that synergy. But when they get there, one of the things I love about Maxi, he talked last season, or maybe it was the previous year, that Goody gives him the authority, if that's the right word, to decide when to rotate with Jackson and now presumably with Grundy, when to, where to play on the ground. And one of the things that's brilliant about Max is that he reads the game so well. He's a brilliant reader of the actual game of footy, but he also reads the moments. Like he really is a great leader, a great skipper. But he seems to intuitively be able to read the vibe of a game, know when to push back if he needs to, or maybe take up a more aggressive positioning. And so once him and Grundy get there, really get that chemistry where they're sort of, it's almost unconscious or subconscious the way that they play together. It really means that they can, fluidly change who's rucking at any given time, who pushes back, and once they do get that, it becomes even another sort of weapon, I guess. But it really maximizes, on the pun, Maxi's ability to do exactly what you said and be really influential. And I don't know whether, because I didn't, obviously watch Collingwood enough to sort of get a sense, well, not as much as I watched the D's anyway, but I'm not quite sure what, role Grundy was playing. But if he's playing 80% of the time in the ruck, he's got much less limited ability to drop back in defence and do what he's going to be doing at Melbourne to be able to push forward. So it might take him a little while to get used to that. But when he does, he's a smart fella and he probably reads the game really well as well. Then you've got two players who are making on-field decisions about where to place themselves that's going to, most benefit the team. I think that I can see that working really well. And it's just, it's so important, isn't it? The footy is really still kicked to a big pack and either mark it or make sure the opposition don't mark it and then go to work at the foot of that contest. And that's where our smalls come in. That's our, one wood is winning those contests. It's really, the number one thing for the D's is winning contests, whether they're 40-60 or 70-30, we win them. But we need to bring the ball to ground in order to give players the opportunity to win it. Maxi, Grundy, McDonald, Brown, all are creating contest and all, if not marking it, bringing it to ground in a predictable way that other, their teammates can go to work at the base of that. So super important, both of them, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing how it plays out come the season.
Singer goes on to say that in the post-game thread, a Demonland poster, Old 55, posted the following hit-out statistics from the match, and I thought it would be interesting to hear Bim Man's take on this. So Richmond won the hit-outs on the day 37-24. That's a differential of 13. Nankervis 24, Soldo 13, Gawn 12, Grundy 11, T-Mac 1. You discussed before about how the clearances were pretty much even on the day, 33 to Richmond, 32 to Melbourne. Centre clearances, Richmond won the day 18-11, a differential of 7, but we won the stoppages around the ground 21-15, a differential of 6. So, Big Man, I know that you have often said it's with the centre clearances, it's not necessarily who gets the clearance, it's that post kick, who gets that clearance after that, who gets the ball after that. Was there anything you noticed in terms of clearances this week?
Yeah, I think just those stats were really interesting, and just on their paper, it's sort of just when you read them, you'd think if you might think, oh, they killed us in the ruck, but immediately after that, in the podcast thread, there's I think Viper Crunch put up the stats around hit-outs to advantage, and we won the hit-outs to advantage by 6 or 7. So,
yeah.
It's really not about how many hit-outs you get. It's about what happens. So, again, a couple of things for the Ds, not against Richmond because Richmond don't bring an extra to the contest, but say the Sydney Swans, Carlton, Brisbane Lion, amazingly, they bring an extra to the stoppage. And with obviously the goal to increase the likelihood they win that stoppage, we don't, and so we have an extra player somewhere. That extra player is usually in defence, and we put pressure, still enough pressure if they do win it, to turn it over at the half-back flank and bounce it from there. And that happened, scores from turnover in this game. I think we scored maybe 6 goals from the back half in transition or something like that, which is just fantastic in in a game of footy. That's a big part of that is even when we lose the stoppage clearance, putting enough pressure on it so they are forced to do that dump kick. And then, again, this is a team that we've modelled ourselves after in terms of that sort of kick. And, they still couldn't stop it. And we just went to work. We brought it to ground, intercept mark, give it to Bowey and smash. We're away. We're outnumbering down back, moving the ball quickly with aggressive kicks into the corridor, which was fantastic. So the other thing is the stat that I'd really like to know in that, as you say, post-clearance is the critical one. And so those examples of losing it and then winning the post, the next one is what you were referring to. But the other one is how many scores you get directly from a stoppage, from a clearance. That's really the critical one. It's not the totals. It's the, how what sort of quality are they? And they're obviously putting an emphasis on quality, and that's again that question about the setups in the centre square and around the ground. And the other thing that I think is it means that if you're confident of winning good quality clearances, you can afford to have players like Hunter set up in a aggressive position. So by that I mean like on the offensive side of that contest, because if you've got your spare back to protect if they win it, but if we win it, we can set up our players in good positions like they use track for, but they'll use Hunter increasingly for this, get it to them, and we're away to the races. So it really is it's all about the quality.
Speaking of
quality of the clearances.
Speaking of quality clearances, how was Clary's clearance when he just kept going and going and going? It really deserved a goal and almost was.
Yeah. We should have given it off though, really.
He probably should
have. There was
have.
a couple. And I wonder whether it's maybe who knows, maybe they've been given a team instruction to go for goal more often. Chandler also burn a couple of people going for goal in a similar situation.
There were, but there were also a lot of very unselfish plays when I was just screaming, have a shot. There was one time Rivers went in, track ran in and have a ping, and he handballs it off. There was a lot of, I don't know if it's unselfish or they were trying to do the team thing or just because it was a pracky match, I don't know.
Yeah. What was Oliver's numbers in the end? He looks like he's playing at 3/4 thingo, and suddenly I guess we're spoiled for riches in terms of track and Ollie and Viney, but he
31
just seems to rack him up.
31, but track 32. Yeah. Oliver, 8, and miraculously, look at Oliver's stats, 18 kicks, 13 handballs. It's usually the opposite way around. He did, I noticed he did kick a lot.
I mean, I think that sort of goes, we're kicking, what was the total kick number? Have you got them? Because I think, we're kicking more often than handballing, which doesn't seem to be the trend across the AFL.
I did see that. Kicks 228 to 190. And then handballs, they had 147 to 156. They had more handballs.
So that's a pretty big difference, isn't it, statistically, between our handballs and our ratio to kick. And, across the AFL, it's generally closer to 50-50. So, what's that, 60-40 or something? It speaks to the way we want to play, which is control the ball and, still move it forward. But, kicking, hitting targets, it really gives you the option to control a game that, you want to be in control of when the ball's in motion as opposed to it just being in motion all the time. It's when it's in motion all the time, you can't really control the game, and it's a bit of a raffle. They're better games to watch if you're a neutral fan, but it sort of doesn't jibe with Goody's philosophy of playing the percentages and controlling the way the game's played.
Our good friend Terence in Belgium asks, when will the commentators give us the respect they clearly have for Richmond? So much of the commentary was about Martin, Bolton, even a comment about Nankervis being a great pickup for Richmond. Are we destined to be treated as something less than? Your thoughts?
I don't think so. I personally think the general vibe that I've heard from commentators, is a bit like, well, geez, the D's are looking good. I mean, they are looking good. So I think that, I guess Tigers have won 3 flags in the last 5 years. They deserve a bit of success, sort of credit, don't they? But personally, as they're saying, I think, suddenly Rewalt looks a bit old, Cochin looks a bit old, and hopefully he gets a week for
No, he didn't. You mustn't be up. He got fined.
Right. Well, suddenly those older players, and then Nankervis doesn't look the player he was, and I give it 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a couple of losses, and the Tiger fans will come for the decision for Rewalt for playing another year, for instance. Selfish, keeping a young player out, that sort of stuff, and. So no, I mean, I'm not sure. I think that we'll get our credit this year. Sustained success. There's always the historical thing about Melbourne, and bottom line is that we went out in straight sets
Yeah.
for whatever reason last year, is that we deserve to be under the pump and under pressure, really.
And I guarantee you, if we have another bumper start to this year, they'll be, there might be 10-1 or 10-0 or 11-2, whatever. Can we trust them? We'll still have that all year.
Of course.
So we've got to put the runs on the board ourselves. Royal Demon says, first of all, thank you for covering these preseason games. It really is great to have you back talking about the Ds. I cannot wait for the season to start, and I hope we can make up for last year's disappointing end. My question for the panel: is the Rivers in the midfield experiment over? In the match sim game last week, Rivers attended a number of centre bounces, but this week he only attended one. It didn't appear that he was involved in many of the around-the-ground stoppages as a true mid either, and seemed to be back playing his usual half-back rebounding role. I get that the preseason games are a chance to throw the magnets around the board a little bit, and that is why we got to see him play some midfield minutes in the match sim after being teased about this new role by our track watchers. I also get that this week's practice match was probably more of a true reflection of how we are going to play come the real stuff in a fortnight. Having said that, I would still love to see Rivers in the middle a little bit more, especially because we still did have a variety of players attend centre bounces this week, with Clary 20, Harms 20, Track 15, Cozzy 13, Sparrow 12, Nibbler 7. Bimman, is the Rivers midfield experiment over? We were raving about it last week, and I feel that it might have been taken away from us all too soon.
It's a good name for a band, the Rivers midfield experiment. Maybe a bit wordy, but I do wordy, so that's all right. Well, look, I think the way that they're going to use players like him and even Gus is really that sort of
pinch hit,
random, put them in, pinch hit as much as anything to disrupt the opposition plans, who have had 2 years of going to work on the way we set up. For me, that's what it's more about. I don't think that the fact that he only went to one is any indication that they won't use him. Well, that was really interesting, those stats. I'm not sure where he got them from, or she, Royal Demon, the attending centre bounces, because I was amazed that Harms attended 20.
I'm pretty sure the stats on the AFL site. I'll have to find it. List centre bounce attendances. Keep going.
Yeah, so I was really surprised in that number. Viney comes back into that team. That's gonna, that's gonna make it harder for Harms to get a run there. But it shows what they're thinking about Harms' role. Yep. And the other one that's interesting in those numbers is 7 centre attendances, or whatever you call them, for Nibbler, which is probably more than he had the whole of last season combined, I would have thought. How many times would have he been to the centre?
I don't know. I'm just saying, you do on the AFL app, you go onto, into the match centre, go onto the players, click the player's name, scroll right down, and that's one of the things, centre bounce attendances. Incidentally, Brayshaw, who I've got now, had 4.
4.
Yeah.
So, I look, it's for back to Rivers, I think they'll use him as a, throw it in there as a wild card, that as opposed to a regular midfield. But doesn't it show just with his kicking, and also Gus doesn't it stand out when, you've got better kicks around them in the, when they make a clanger, it really becomes more evident. But he does. He's better when he's kicking at 60 metres. Yeah, well,
Rivers' strength is that booming kick out of defence, or booming kick into the forward line when we need to get it there quick. 640 MD asks, how about an analysis of Woden's work compared to the other younger players? 5 touches, 2 marks, 1 tackle on only a short time on the ground. Impressive? ? For me, I liked what I saw in the very short amount of time that we got to see him play. 640 MD asked to compare him to other young players, and I guess the best comparison would be a comparison with the other debutant, for want of a better word, in Bailey Laurie, who played more minutes and had 6 touches and a tackle. Personally, I was more enthused by Wowey's game. It was late in the match, and he was a set of fresh legs on a very hot afternoon. I was a little bit underwhelmed with Laurie's game. If I had to pick one that I'd like to see more of, then for me, it's Wowie. B-Man, what are your thoughts on
Yeah, it
Woden
was
and Laurie, I guess?
a bit disappointing for Laurie's sake in terms of, I guess the club gave him an opportunity to plant a bit of a flag, and it's hard to say he took it. He did that nice tap on, which was really clever
Yep.
and helped set up a scoring. But it wasn't he didn't really play to his strengths. He hit some targets, but also turned it over a couple of times in those 6 kicks from memory, or maybe I'm being a bit hard on him. But Wowie, I thought, one thing is later in the game and they were flagging, the Tigers were flagging. So
it was, don't underestimate how hot it was. It was a hot afternoon.
Yeah, exactly.
We've played
so he's come on fresh.
We've played 2 hot games in a row in a week. So,
I'm Selwyn. I'm going to call him now. I don't actually know him. That's the truth. But I'm sure Selwyn would love the fact it's in the heat. There's some theory around it. But Wowie, I like the way he looks a natural winger, doesn't he? He's got stronger. He looks so much like his dad. But it's weird because he's a right footer. So he should dye his hair and start kicking left foot. But the thing that I thought was impressive about him actually, and it goes to my point about the importance, they're so easy to miss when a potential scoring chain breaks down. Sometimes you don't think about that as being the sort of mistake in the same way as you do when a player misses a shot for goal, or they turn it over, deep in defence and cost a goal. But the reality is, if a scoring chain breaks down because of a simple mistake, it's one less score that you can do. It's one more score that the opposition can do. And of those 6, he probably had a couple of score involvements. I think they define score involvements as any connection in the chain you're involved in. Nibbler was off the charts on the weekend, but a few times we had scoring chains go down the ground, and he was part of that chain. It's easy to say, well, it's pretty standard to get the handball off or hit a target, but we know as these fans how often those scoring chains break down through just poor execution, which he didn't do. I thought he was really neat, ran hard. He looked, well, if it was just direct comparison with Laurie, he looks ahead of Laurie. I would have thought just on that showing.
D-Minion wants to know, keen to hear your thoughts on how you thought our forward line functioned. We once again kicked over 100 points, 3 goals to T-Mac, 3 goals apiece to the resting rucks, only 1 goal to Benny Brown from a free kick. People in the post-match thread were critical of Ben Brown. Keep up the great work. For me, with Ben Brown, I think it's still important to keep him in the team. He's going to take away one of their best defenders, a tall defender at that, because he's got those long arms. If we kick to his advantage a little bit more, he's going to get free kicks. He's got to get his arms chopped off.
I think
I'm not down
particularly now with McDonald in the team, with Grundy pushing forward and swapping with Max, who both, remarkably kicked 6 goals between them at halftime, I think, wasn't it?
Yep.
Grundy had 3 goals at halftime, and they kicked 6 between them in the end, albeit one of them was Joe the Goose. But I think, so it's different to last season. You're not relying on Benny Brown to kick your score. You're exactly right. You cannot do anything but put a really good, very tall defender on him. And how many very good defenders do opposition teams have?
You put a third rate on him.
Yeah, exactly.
He will
chop up. That's right. So you've got to put a decent player on him. As I noted, if they don't go backwards, which they seem to do every year with umpiring, they say they'll be tough on this, and then by round 3 they've forgotten it.
I forgot to say when you were talking about the umpiring, and if they do this, they'll be different in 5 minutes.
We'll see. But the other thing is, just from a structural point of view, when he's the one out and McDonald not playing, then it's really, last year was about, well, was he going to kick us a winning score? But now he's a piece, he can go back to being important structurally, just like Tommy Mack is. And so, it's not just the fact that he takes a very good tall defender to man up on him. It means that you can set up your structure around, kicking to that contest, knowing that it'll be brought to the ground. And again, having the forwards put pressure on when the ball hits the ground. So, he's not going out of that team, as Picket Fence has made the point a number of times in the Track Watchers thread, how fit and up and running he is. And I think I recall correctly him saying that he's been his best trainer and most impressive forward. So this in the training period, so he's not going anywhere. He kicked the goal. And he structurally, I think, is super important. He had to deal with the fact that he didn't have any hair. So that's
I thought when I saw him doing the warm up in the pre-game, I just saw this guy and I thought, who's this skinny Casey guy they've got running around?
Yeah,
and then I
he
realized
looks
it was
pretty
him.
skinny, doesn't he?
Yeah, he just looked like some random Casey ringing.
Yeah, just on the forward line. So I think the other thing is their patterns. People will be pleased to see, a lot of people were critical about, the model of kicking to the pocket. And we talked about that quite a few times over the last couple of years. They'll still continue to do that when there's not another kick, but they're clearly kicking to the top of the goal square more often.
We're not doing what we did last year, rest assured.
No, we will when it's the percentage play. I mean, we did. We got 4 goals from kicking to the pocket. Grundy kicked a goal when it was kicked to the pocket. T-Mac kicked a goal. In fact, I reckon we probably got Hunter was from the pocket, not that it was kicked to him. But we got probably 4 or 5 goals of the ball being kicked long, deep to the pocket. So it's not like they're going to get rid of it, but they're definitely being more offensive in where they're putting it. That does create the risk of turning it over, but they're prepared to they've adjusted that risk reward
and it makes you a bit more unpredictable as well.
It does, but that's where those kicks that I was talking about come in, where they're coming in a bit flatter and harder, which is tricky when you're still going over the top. But that's clearly something that they seem to be working on. Get it in quick. Don't allow players to come in and hold Maxi. He took a beautiful mark on the lead, by the way, where it seemed to be sort of like right with the player. He almost seemed to take it over the top of his head, the goal he kicked. But just on that sort of more aggressive play and our forward line, the synergy seems to be building. It's really important to note that Fritsch isn't in that team.
Yeah,
he's our best forward, and there's a question about who's the most underrated player in the AFL or in our team. It's got to be Fritsch. I mean, he's been our best forward by a mile for the last 2 seasons. There's no argument about that, I wouldn't have thought.
So
not just on the scoreboard, it's just his ability to be involved, to hit the target, to take his chances, mark one-on-one. He is the real deal.
So if he was playing this week, I mean, first of all, it just adds another layer to our dismantling of Richmond. But how does it work? How does that forward line work the way it was set up this week with Fritsch in the mix? Did Grundy and Gawn not go in as much? How do you see it working?
I'd have to look again at the replay, but I wonder whether Chandler was playing.
We've got a question about Chandler in a
Fritsch's
sec,
role and sort of leading. So I think
maybe
it's a swap. So, I don't think, like, in some respects, it just creates another headache for the opposition, because you've got to he's so good one-on-one marking Fritsch. It's such an underrated part of his game. He reads the ball well and he uses his body just brilliantly to keep his opponent away from the drop zone. He's fantastic. I just think he's a brilliant footballer. So he's another player you can't afford to be putting you need a good defender on him, and you can't put a small on him either, because he marks so well that you've got to put him at least a medium. So he's a big weapon. But so I think they're certainly evolving 100 points twice. But as I heard Goody say during the week, is when asked about being more aggressive and it looks like we will be looking to be more aggressive, he was quick to say yes, but defense is still the critical thing. Our game, quote unquote, our game is based on defense. It's defense first. It's such a critical part of his philosophy about football. And I think it's important too, because in terms of the offense, again, to reinforce that offense so often starts from our defense. It's that all-team defense. But how many goals I think it was 6 goals we got from transition from our back half, which is an absolute KPI for Goody, is the way to put pressure on the kick coming inside 50, turn it over, run it up the ground, create an outnumber, and get it into a forward line as quick as possible, and then they can go to work. But that all starts from the defense. So, it was interesting just the way he was quick to basically to pivot to, well, no, we're still defense is the most important thing, is what he said.
Well, it is. Have a look. We mostly keep teams to 60, then the 70s, very rarely into the 80s, 90s, and hundreds is unheard of these days against us. So if we can keep that and still kick, look, we've kicked 100 twice.
Yeah. And it was a practice game, so Goody, he's probably a pretty grumpy bugger, but he would have been pretty unhappy with, even though they got to 70 points, they got at least 3 easy goals that he would have been annoyed at.
Yeah, there were.
Where they ran it out of the square quickly, or, there was a mistake from us. So, there'll be, 60, 70 points, so that will be a big metric for him, is keeping, I think they'll pick a number, but it'll be 60 and 70. Don't let the opposition get any more than 70 points. If we'll win every game we play if we can keep the opposition to 70 points.
I reckon Maisie it'd be 60 and lower.
Yeah. Well, again, they won't want that to get out. They'd be a bit annoyed that it got out last year, that number that they picked. Remember that so that was just one more thing last year that it would have annoyed them.
Okay, so sticking with the forwards, Kiwi D says, love your work, guys. Just on Chandler, how did you see his game? Certainly had the opportunity to make a massive claim for a round 1 berth with 1 goal 3, which easily could have been 4 goals. Didn't have massive numbers with 7 disposals, but he did take 4 marks, which is good for a small forward. And as mentioned, could have booted 4. Where does Chandler sit in your calculations for the Bulldogs game? Bimman, you sort of alluded to the fact that maybe it's a straight swap for Bailey Fritsch, which is unlucky for Chandler, but Fritsch, as you said, the most underrated player in the AFL. You can't keep him out. So where does Chandler sit in your calculations?
Well, a bit will depend on...
given Cozzy's going to play a bit in the midfield, so you need...
Yeah, I think just with Chandler, I think he's clearly there and thereabouts in the best 22. It's going to be a tough team to get into. He looks in good nick. I know he kicked poorly on the weekend, but he's got a really neat kicking action that's, going to stand the test of time, I think. It's a super hard position, as we've, how often did we talk about Cozzy only getting 5 or 6 possessions, particularly in his first season, and it being, that small forward is about the toughest role in footy, I reckon, in terms of, it's feast or famine, and usually famine. So it's all about pressure. Our forward pressure is RP FC actually pointed out last year a number of times in the first half was well off. And so he's, I don't know what pressure he was, what his numbers were pressure-wise, but his pressure is generally really good. The question will be, partly on round 1, as for round 1, they may not play Fritsch. They might play him through the reserves, given he hasn't played either of the practice games. It'll be interesting because a little bit depends on, where his injury's at. Who'd know from what the club says about injuries, much to my frustration. So I think there's every chance that they won't. Same might go for Viney. They might run him through Casey as well. So, going forward, I think that he's got that small forward position with Cozzy. It's just, how do you fit them all in, I guess? Though, Fritsch comes back in when he's fit and firing, obviously. So who goes out is the query.
Okay, now we're on to the back line. We're in the home stretch. I'll read the next few questions out and then you can answer them as a whole, because I feel there might be some overlap as they pertain to who we think will get those coveted small defender roles. So here goes. Radelaide says, great to have the potty back for season 2023. How did you view Judd McVee's game this week? He was the talk of the town last week after the match simulation against the Saints. He got his hands on the ball a fair bit and seemed very composed for a first gamer. This week he was given the daunting task of lining up on one of the modern game's greatest players in Brownlow medalist and 3 times Norm Smith medalist Dusty Martin. He was outbodied, illegally I might add, as there is photographic evidence of his jumper being pulled harder than a nun's stare in Sunday school. Judd wasn't as prolific this week with a game low 4 disposals and 1 mark. Is he still a lock for round 1? Bigfoot then says, welcome back, fellas. Great to have the podcast back in weekly rotation. I'd like to sing the praises of Jake Bowey for a moment. Clearly, he fell out of favour last year, and I think it was Binman last week who mentioned that it was probably more from a development perspective than anything else. But boy, oh boy, has he come back with a vengeance and stamped his card for round one. 19 posies, and his disposal is just elite. 100% disposal efficiency, chef's kiss. Then McQueen says, we seem to be swamped with running backs now. Is Hibberd still in the frame, or has Bowey, Rivers, Brayshaw, Salem, and even McVie now in front of him? So, big man, I guess, firstly, Judd McVie's game, is he still a lock for round one? Secondly, there's no question that Jake Bowey is a lock for round one. And thirdly, where does that leave Hibberd? Is he still in the frame?
Working back from Hibbo, he's definitely still in the frame. But it's interesting hearing the way they talk about these games. This is the ones, and I've heard them talk about the training and this is, he's not going to be in the round one team. Like, he won't have been played 2 Casey games essentially and come in. So
it's a big statement not to play him. So that tells you everything you need to know there.
Well, I mean, I think it's such a tough, call is, he's over the journey. And one of the silliest things on Demonland is all of the palaver about, Melksham having photos of Goody or some such, and Hibbo being an old mate of him. But I've made the error of as we talked about last week, of underestimating where he's at. He's the sort of player who will come in, take his chance when it comes in. But at the moment, it would appear exactly as McQueen notes, he's behind a few. As for McVeigh, I 100% think he's a lock for round one. And in fact, even though it was a low possession game, that's he. I mean, I don't know where Dusty's at, but Dusty didn't have a great game. No. That was, that I didn't see that hold until I saw that photo.
Yeah, I didn't see it either. I just saw the photo. Yeah.
But I mean, how many players at AFL level are gonna be able to outmark Dusty one-on-one when it's kicked? It was a perfect kick that allowed him to hold him in front of the contest. Who's going to win?
Yeah, I don't expect
Hibberd wouldn't win that.
I don't expect any of our players to have.
No, exactly. And so there were a few things McVeigh did. He's got really good. He's got that knack of using the ball in a clever way and getting himself out of trouble really well. There was a couple of examples. So what was really telling, though, is that they elected to play him on Dusty the week after that they elected to play him on Higgins. They're 2 senior AFL players. Higgins is what? He must be mid-20s. He must have played 150 games at AFL. And, so that suggests to me is not only is that he's likely to be lining up at halfback flank, but maybe it's that player that they've got him in mind for, which is that medium. Dusty's he's a bit bigger than Higgins, but, the player that we have trouble with, that we were talking about last year, we've got trouble covering. Those sort of marking a player like Paplick, he's the player in my mind who we really struggle with. Since Jets has left, we don't have a player that, Hibbo's strong enough, and he did a great job, Hibbo, playing that role last year, but got found out a couple of times, which is, it's not really his go. So I wonder whether they've earmarked McVeigh for that role, and then to push off that player when he gets the opportunity to, and use that, he's really good kick. So short answer is yes. Yeah, I think he's a lock for round one.
Which makes sense playing him on that. There's baptism by fire. They've thrown him in the deep end, and this is what you're going to come up against in a couple of weeks.
And it's a pretty big message, isn't it, to have him line up on Dusty?
Oh, they knew. They put him there on purpose.
But again, not wanting to make this a Tigers show, that'd be another concern of mine. How focused is Dusty? He's such he in all 3 years they won the premiership. I mean, he won the Norm Smith. Did he win the Norm Smith in each of those games?
He won all 3. I mean, there's
that's ridiculous.
Question mark that Hawley should have won one of them, but anyway.
Yeah, he's our maxi, isn't he? And so if he's not if he's playing at 70% of that level, you've got Cochin, you've got Rewalt, you've got, my least favourite player, who's, I'm not sure why I'm including in it, Lynch. In that group, he's a pretty good player. But, you've got 3 of the first 3 who are on the back end of their career, it's still in their best 22. Yeah. It's a bit of a worry for him, I reckon.
Yeah, just in regards to Lynch, I heard that they just found him inside Stephen May's shorts from the other day when they were emptying their washing machine. And Bowey, Jake Bowey, a lock.
Is it? And just the way he's another player who, in some ways, similar to Fritsch in the sense that he's smaller than say your average halfback flanker, thin, not just sort of height wise. He doesn't, he looks pretty light, but he uses his body so well in marking contests, and he has an ability one-on-one. That just speaks to a natural footballer. It's amazing to think that he played his junior footy as a mid-half forward. He didn't play, as I understand it, he played barely any junior footy at halfback flank. So really kudos to the club because they've identified his skill set and that's where they've put him. And he just looked up. Absolutely agree. He just looked awesome in that game. And to think we've got Salem coming back into that back line as well. Going back to Hibbo, it's going to be a tough old gig to get into that back line. And, the other one is that's not mentioned by McQueen is where does that leave Tomlinson? I mean, Tomlinson's a big, so he's not that sort of small half-back flank, but he's going to find it mightily hard to get back into that team as well.
El Diablo 14 has two quick questions. Is it better to use Grundy more in the forward 50 while Max goes more to support our back line? I feel Grundy is a better goal kicker than Max.
I think that it'll be a bit like I was saying before is that, Maxi will decide where's best for him in the flow of the game. It really is about where the game's at a particular point, the momentum. That's what he's good at reading is being able to, maybe it's time to push back or, I think I agree Grundy looks a better forward, but having said that, Maxi, flushed that ball. He dead straight, none of his curl that he's had.
And look, we haven't been tested in the two games that we've practice matches, but we haven't been tested in terms of scoreboard pressure. I imagine if we're down or whatever, you might see Gorney go back a little bit and help out in defence. But if all things are going well, I think we're going to be just resting him, rotating him in the forward line.
And he would have been thrilled to get a couple of free kicks from the umpires for marking infringements. So let's hope it.
He always gets clipped on the head, though. Really,
he does. He got clobbered again, didn't he?
He turned around to whoever clobbered him. I think it was Nankervis, and gave him a bit of a look and a look at the umpires.
Yep. One of the things I love about Maxi is when the opposition in a ruck contest get a free kick. There was one Nankervis got, I think, his look of absolute sort of bemusement probably towards the umpire. They're worth their weight in metaphorical gold, but it just cracks me up.
And the other question was sort of touched on, who's the most underrated player on our list? I feel Fritsch gets almost no love around the league. He's easily a top 8 forward. He really doesn't.
Well, he's number 2. Number 1, of course, is Nibbler. He's got to be the most underrated footballer in the AFL. He was fantastic on the weekend. And after my spirited defence of him last week, he heard the call and he was everywhere. Even the commentators who were shocking at underrating him, were noting that he brought his own share and he kicked goals, he hit targets. I don't know have you got his score involvements handy there, Andy?
I don't know if the
32. He had 32 score involvements. That's incredible. He was terrific.
Does the AFL app, this one on the phone, have? No, it doesn't. You have to wait till the year starts, and I'll get. Oh no, score involvement's 9. Well short of the 32.
But 9, and I think I also read, so that's 9. 9 is nothing to sneeze at score involvements for a half forward who's pushing back hard and essentially being a half back flanker as well. I think I read that Maxi had 9 score involvements, which is bananas for a ruck.
Does that include his own scores? Because he kicked 3 goals too.
I think it does. That's
he's had 4.
Pretty good score involvement. Yeah. Well, 4.
4 other ones.
Still,
no,
whatever.
I'm not
it's
done.
Still 9 score involvements.
Yeah. All right.
Well, that makes Nibbler's score involvements even more impressive because he only kicked 1 goal.
Yeah, that's true. Roos 2 contends that the intensity, and this we were talking about this before, the intensity was great, but it's a hell of a long season.
Yeah, I was thinking about that in terms of our approach to last season. I wonder if last season the plan was not to be too intense in the preseason, or to keep a lid on it to a certain degree, an early part of the season, for fear of burning out later in the season after the emotion of the flag and all the related palaver, like the big thing at the MCG in December. And then, of course, the shorter preseason, and it was even shorter than normal for other flag contenders, because this last season went into October, of course, in 21. The approach of the opposition in the first half of the season also would have fed into that sort of vibe of low intensity, given so many teams elected to basically just try and deny us the footy and not attack at all. Like, the best example was that Port game, which was, they barely bothered crossing the halfway line for half a game of footy. And we were happy to let them do that and focus on our defensive aspect. And you remember Goody saying, we don't care how much we win by, or, and it was almost as if they were really working on that aspect at the sort of, and not worrying about the attacking. But that led to a lot of low energy games, didn't it? Where it just, there wasn't that buzz. As I noted, RPFC said, through the first half of last season, and other posters as well, quite a number of other posters, that our forward half pressure was down in that first half of last season. Maybe that was partly a function also of consciously dialing things back a bit to avoid burnout and get through the season. As I noted before, I'm glad we start the season with some serious opponents, because we'll have to play with, really good intensity to win them. And I suspect, and at least I hope, that in the games against the less strong opposition, we'll be more likely to be proactive and not let them just chip it around in their back half like we did so often last year. Though, you watch heaps of those teams, those middle rung teams will still rely on flooding our forward line, which makes for pretty crappy, stodgy footy. So I really like the approach we're taking. But as the comment is that it's a long season, and, hopefully they haven't allowed that intensity pendulum to swing too far the other way. And again, like last season, the proof we won't know until come the end of the season. So, but maybe those things like rotating the players through the midfield, keeping them fresh, having Grundy coming in as a new way of, all of those things are energising. They're giving players like Nibbler and Cozzy and Rivers new looks at the game, and maybe that's part of it. Maybe part of last year, one of the things that it was the sort of, maybe the physical intensity was okay, but the psychological intensity was not quite there. And, so maybe all of those strategies are part of, the exercise to keep the players mentally sort of attuned. And that's the general vibe I've got, from fans as well, from reading Demonland, from you, from players I've heard, the coaches, is that they're super excited about this season. They can't wait. They owe something from last year. That seems to be the energy they're taking into it, which wasn't quite the same last year. We're coming off the flag, and so but it is. I think it's a really good point. It's a super long season. It's 3 seasons, isn't it? It's this first 10 games. And then it's the middle period of the year where things are difficult. Then it's the last 2 or 3 games and the finals. And as Goody talks about all the time, the finals are a whole season by themselves. So, in terms of how hard this game is aerobically, physically, mentally, it's incredibly difficult sport to play for at that level for 6 months.
Well, I think we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you to Lazy, RPFC, Viper Crunch, Lefty, Roger, Melly, D, Old Fart, Delightful Play, 3183D, Singer, Royal Demon, 640 MD, D Minion, Kiwi D, Radelaide, Bigfoot, McQueen, El Diablo 14, and Roos 2. Thank you to Noah for leaving a voicemail for us, and we'll get to your other question next week. Thank you to my co-host Binman, and don't forget our interview with Brodie Grundy will drop later this week. It might already be available if you're listening to this after Thursday. If you're listening to this live or before Thursday and you want to ask a question of Brodie, leave a comment in the Brodie Grundy interview thread on demonland.com. We'll We'll be back next Monday for our massive season 2023 preview show. We'll be rejoined by Demonland veteran George, who'll be back fresh from holidays. If you have a question or comment relating to the Demons in 2023 that you want us to answer, then head on over to demonland.com. Look out for the season 2023 preview podcast thread. Drop your question for the panel there. You can also leave us a voicemail at 039016 3666, and don't worry, nobody answers, so don't get shy on us. Join us live next week at 8:30 p.m. on Monday, or find us wherever you get your podcast from. Go Demons.
Leggers.
Come on, Demons. Come on.